Alright guys, TacticalRab here, and today I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. It was all kicking off last night over CDL Power Rankings, OpTic in the A tier, not the S tier, and some talk that the players aren't mature enough to recover from the drama of the off-season, and also that Shotzzy will not hesitate to drop some of his best friends if the team doesn't go well at the start of this season. And also, aBeZy was absolutely roasting Ben for suggesting that Paris, now Vegas, should have brought back Jimbo and Johnny from last season, but he actually makes a reasonable point about the direction, I think, of this Legion franchise. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one. First of all, this from a Breaking Point. This has been a long time in the making, actually. This Challengers tournament we are putting on right at the start of the new game, November 5th through the 6th, in search of the next up, effectively, in the CDL. Every year we do the Challengers rankings for the players over there, and generally a lot of those guys have ended up in the CDL, and we have a pretty good hit rate, let's just say, on that one. So yeah, we're going to try and do our best to put on a really entertaining tournament right at the start of the season, or pretty much the game launches 1 week later. There's this tournament going on. Miles and Chance will be casting it. There may be some other friends involved. I'll probably be on the stream either doing some hosting stuff or maybe casting. We'll probably switch things around a little bit, and even Zinni, I think, wanted to get involved. We'll see in a second. So it should be a fun community thing. Should be a great tournament to watch right at the start of the game's launch, and yeah, hopefully see you guys all there. Definitely make a note of you in your calendars, all that type of good stuff. And even as Method says, let me cast a game at me, you, Zuma, TriCast. So yeah, hopefully that we can get something like that involved. Should be a fun community thing, as I just mentioned. The other thing to talk about from the Breaking Point side is Novus, part of our management team over at the Breaking Point perspective. He is joining LA Thieves as their general manager. Novus started out as the analyst for the Paris Legion back in Modern Warfare. Then he joined LA Thieves in Cold War as their analyst. Then went to Seattle Surge as their general manager last year. Obviously made some good decisions over there. And now Thieves are bringing him back as their GM. So really cool stuff. Obviously, as I say, Novus made some great calls on Seattle last year with the team that they ended up building, and now he's going to Thieves. And just because he's the GM now, not the analyst as he was before, doesn't mean he's not going to be looking at the data and the numbers and trying to figure out what could be wrong with the team or what might need to happen in the future in terms of potential changes or in terms of substitute positions and stuff like that. Because last season, of course, Thieves did incredibly well by not making any moves. So you would very well imagine this season they also will do the same. But like, look, I mean, what's the longest time any team has ever lasted? Pretty much 3 years. Even FaZe, with dominance they had in the CDL era, they only lasted a couple of seasons, really. So you'd imagine that Thieves, sooner or later, will be breaking apart when the time comes. Novus will probably be the guy to make the call, but you would certainly think for the upcoming season, they will run it back as the same roster for the entire year, just because of how it worked out for them last year. But look, whether they come in as number one, that's a question for the Power Rankings we shall see here in just a couple of seconds. Also interesting because, of course, Mardog, who was the GM, he's now stepped into more like a talent management role over there at 100T. Novus is coming in as a kind of the brain of the COD team, right? And in terms of, you know, I think like Mardog was definitely well involved and made some good calls at times, but there were questions about, okay, how much does Mardog really watch challenges? How well is the kind of 100 Thieves management really aligned with the next up type players? Novus most certainly is. And even as Kenny says, glad to have the GOAT back. So the players really rated what he did as their analyst during the Cold War season. And yeah, I mean, you'd imagine that Novus there with Shane as well and Jacob is going to create a very fearsome behind the scenes team over there in that franchise. And that's been the question with other teams, Minnesota, Rokkr and elsewhere, as to how good their behind the scenes staff really are. Even Toronto, now they've lost Marky B, they don't really have a clear head coach right now. And Minnesota, yes, they've got Brian Saint, they've got Looney, kind of, you know, good couple of names on that team, but in terms of results, haven't necessarily been delivering them the last couple of years. And there were even some questions before this season began. I mean, it hasn't really begun yet technically, but of course their team is going to stay the same in terms of the coaching perspective and their full roster for now. But there was some questions whether further coach mania is going to happen with some of these other rosters that haven't had really the success from their coaching staff the last season or two. Thought this is kind of funny actually here from aBeZy, because of course aBeZy, well, briefly part of 100 Thieves back in the day during the Black Ops 3 days. Hey guys, there's a Black Ops 2 charity tournament going down this weekend. My teammates Crim, Envoy and Jacob and I, and some up-and-comers looking for a chance. Would love to have some, well, drink GV or whatever you pronounce it as, to rejuvenate our play with GV throughout the weekend. So maybe they can get a sponsorship for that, would be pretty funny. And just to say there's some Gunless, because like of course, I don't know, this betting is kind of funny and it's obviously not his room, but kind of some LA Thieves colours on here, right? So we're trying to figure out where Gunless might end up as a substitute, if anywhere, and maybe a small, probably nothing of an indication. Let's talk power rankings then, because it was all kicking off last night on the flank, right? So they were trying to do their power rankings list for the upcoming season, and they came up with, I think, a relatively decent list on the whole. This is the list they came up with initially, and then it kind of got upgraded or changed to this list with Paris all the way down here at the bottom. So I'll just kind of go through this real quick, then I'll share a few minutes of clips here, because honestly, it was all kicking off. So firstly, the S tier, I suppose. LA Thieves and FaZe is I think FaZe most certainly have to be in the S tier. There really is no way around it. Now, aBeZy was making the point, a pretty interesting point, that his team in Evil Geniuses back in World War II, they won the World Championship that season in 2018. Now, obviously, that was arguably considered the most fluke World Championship win of all time, because they certainly weren't favourites. There was Team Caliber, there was Rise Nation, but EG were at least marginally in the conversation, because they had come second at Seattle a couple of events prior. They had showed some promise. And Zuma was kind of roasting aBeZy and saying, oh, you know, that was like Paris Legion winning champs. Reality, it wasn't really. But aBeZy was using that logic to say, well, yeah, look, Thieves might have done very well at the end of Vanguard, but it was Call of Duty Vanguard, arguably one of the most inconsistent and worst Call of Duty games for competitive of all time. So does that necessarily translate going back to back in that game to going, you know, to becoming S tier immediately in this game? Now, I think if I was to rank the entire season, I would say that LA Thieves probably should still be S tier, just because they've got all the pieces there. They've got the fantastic teamwork. They've got the great coaching staff behind the scenes. Do I think they'll be S tier right at the start of the season? I'm personally not so convinced, just because they started out really slow last year. It took them quite some time to actually understand how to play as a team, what roles to use, you know, and how to figure out their teamwork and chemistry so that they could perform as well as they did the last two events. I'm not sure they'll necessarily click like that right at the start of this year's game. So in terms of ranking these teams for Raleigh, the first event in December, I'm not so sure I would actually have LA Thieves in the S tier, but in terms of ranking the entire season and predictions for champions, I think I'd still have LA Thieves up there. So that was one conversation that was being had. Then, of course, there was all the midfield teams. So, you know, Surge, Ultra, Rokkr, whether Rokkr should have been on par with Ultra, whether Surge will fall off as the season goes, because I also think the Surge are a team that might start out very well, but might not be quite so good at maintaining it this season as they were in the last. And then there's the Ultra versus Rokkr discussion, whether they should be on the same tier. To me, like, New York and Boston are on a pretty similar level. Then LA Guerrillas go down here in C, which honestly, like, you know, they were kind of roasting LAG, and I kind of get it, to be honest, because it is a team that I just do not expect to be lasting the test of time. And then there's the bottom three teams, which are relatively clear in my opinion: London, Vegas, and the Florida Mutineers. Now, Florida, for a time here on their list, were the only team in the D tier, which I think is a bit unfair, to be honest, just because I think that Florida, despite not having a particularly spectacular team, Major Maniac, Brack, Vickle, and Havoc, of course, like, they will win a fair few S&Ds. So in terms of their placings and in terms of their kind of points they'll get from the CDL point size, I think they'll actually outperform potentially London and Vegas in the bottom half of this league. Few words on OpTic as well real quick. So they were up here in the A tier, not in the S tier. Now, I think this makes sense, let's be honest here, because yes, they did win an event last season, were looking really good at the start of the year, were certainly the number one team for a time, certainly in the S tier. Like, as the season ended with the same team running it back, you can't guarantee they're going to be, I think, in that S tier category. But the explanation that was given here by the guys on the flank was pretty interesting, just because, you know, look, they well know that there was drama that went down behind the scenes there. iLLeY and Dashy were going to be gone. Then they decided, you know what, this probably isn't a good idea. Let's run it back with the guys regardless. And he said, look, iLLeY hasn't really tweeted much the last few months. These players, like, really, are any CDL pros mature enough to really put something like that completely behind them and completely forget about it, especially if they go in and get beaten game 5 by Florida in a match? Like, you know, all these old issues may well come back to the fore again. So that's one of the key concerns. And also they add into the discussion the fact that Shotzzy in his career, certainly in, you know, Dallas Empire days even, and probably even Halo to some degree, is not afraid to drop best friends and, you know, teammates for a long time if that means getting the best results out of a team. So that was one discussion that was going down. And then there was also the Vegas Legion stuff. Ben had his thoughts on what they should do. aBeZy most certainly disagreed on that one, and the drama was all kicking off.
No team who tries to drop 2 players has a monumental internal breakdown, goes on social media, pretends it was a troll, comes back all good. iLLeY, one of their teammates don't even tweet for months. We have no idea what this team looks like internally right now. Sure, they have the talent. We've seen that. Didn't play out last year that much. This is not an S tier team, guys. There's just no shot we're putting them in S tier to start the year. None of the COD players that I've ever seen are mature enough to just like drop it like nothing happened.
Yeah, but look at the other side though. Like it could just make everyone want to work harder though. No.
And has always been the kind of guy to make very quick move dividends. He's got to drop his friends in order to build winning teams. I think that's a huge kind of thing that he's driving towards. And yeah, I think that kind of explains all that and explains why they may very quickly make moves on this team.
I don't care what you did in the prior game. We are on a new game. Even if you do end up being the #1 team, bro, you're not just getting automatic #1 credit.
Bro, they
Put
won the
those
last
guys
2
in
events
A tier.
with. Bro, they won the last 2 events, and it was clinical back then. It was even the way they won it. It was even the way they won it.
Vanguard. And bro, I'm gonna speak for the whole
He's
community
got
right
full
now.
robot.
Vanguard is probably top 3 worst competitive Call of Duties
And they
of
won
all
the last 2
time.
events back-to-back in
Of-
dominant fashion. They were the best team.
bro,
That speaks more to my point than yours, bro. It's literally the worst.
Bro, we're going
competitive
back.
Call of
We're
Duty
going
of all
back to.
time.
You look at the sub duo of Prolute and TJ, and I look at the rest of the teams, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Respectfully, like, if it were me, I would have ran it back with Johnny and Jimbo and see if we can get some out of those guys.
Hey,
If we
bro,
wanna
you
make
are fried. Listen,
All
listen.
good.
They could have had a better.
At least commit to the rebuild instead of once again, bro. They built another team. They're gonna make a change in the middle of the season when the team is chalked, and we're back to blowing up the squad again in the offseason because they were just a team of leftovers. Can we have a real strategy on what we want to do with the team? That's all I'm.
If they stayed, bro, even if they re-signed them and like,
Bro,
let's run it
that's
back
the
and try
nature of the
again.
CDL.
You really think these guys are going to give them a better suitable environment to do that? No,
Bro,
it doesn't matter if they re-sign Jimbo. Jimbo would still be stuck in Montreal, but and playing
here's
matches.
hold on. This is about the CDL.
Can we stop dancing around the topic on this one? Because I'm so tired, again, the show being elitist. A lot of the issues on
This isn't about elitists.
No,
This is
what?
every roster.
All right, guys, listen. Hold on, Ben. Let me go though. Let Ben. You've been making your point for 20 minutes. You guys have been going in circles.
Who is being elitist?
Let's just move on from the conversation.
I don't want to move.
All right, you got one more. Go ahead. You got 1 point, and then I already know Bad's gonna have another point. Go ahead. It's gonna be the same. Go.
Listen,
Look.
we all want to throw Jimbo and Johnny under the bus.
Go ahead,
Ben,
Pat.
open up your
Go
bank
ahead.
account right now. Open up your
No,
bank
Mano,
account.
what
I
are
need
we
to
doing?
see the payments from
We're
Jimbo
stopping
and
it
Johnny.
there. We're stopping it there.
No,
we're stopping it there.
From Jimbo and Johnny.
Pat, relax. Pat, you got your words in. You got it in.
Unbelievable.
So the thing is on the Vegas Legion discussion is I actually think Ben has a fair point to some degree. What really is the plan with Vegas Legion going into the upcoming season? Like, what is their long-term vision with this squad? Like, they're bringing Clay in for probably either his final season or his penultimate season. Now, in fairness, Temp is only, like probably 23, TJ or maybe like 22, and TJ's 23, and Prolute might be 21, so still a relatively young team there, all things considered. But what really is the future that they're going for with this roster in the long term? Is it once again an example of them picking up the leftover players and then hoping they work? I think that Ben is right to be frustrated about this, that they've, picked up some players and done effectively the same thing as they did in previous seasons. Now, whether I would say that getting, Jimbo and Johnny back is a good idea, I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that one. And of course, it was all kicking off, right? X was like, how could you possibly believe this? Ben was trying to say his piece, and then everyone else was coming in, cracking up about the idea of bringing Jimbo and Johnny back. But I do think he makes an interesting point. Jimbo and Johnny were not well helped at all by that Vegas team, or Paris as they were last season. Jimbo was having to play online out of Canada. That was an absolute disaster. They didn't have a place together. Johnny was a good search and destroy player as well. We saw that. And yet, they give him a couple of months of action. They don't mesh particularly well, don't work well. And you could also argue that at the end of the season, Temp was kind of mentally checked out as well and just trying to make sure he maintained his spot going into the new season. So, look, I don't agree if I was the Vegas manager that I would run it back with Temp, Johnny, and Jimbo and then bring in Clay as the AR. That seems to be like a Ben's idea. But I don't think that he really makes a terrible point in terms of look, you didn't really give these guys a fair run of things. And every few months, it seems like if the team doesn't work out, instead of really dealing with the key problems, such as they don't really seem to spend enough money or have the kind of culture around the team or the coaching staff to actually make a successful franchise and also an attractive franchise, because who actually wants to join and play for Vegas? You made a good point about, Beans and Wardy, those two guys that had offers here, apparently, and they just turned them down to sit on the bench elsewhere. That just goes to show that Paris, Vegas as they are now, are not in a good spot where talented players like that are turning down offers with you to go to another organization. If they were able to offer more money or, have a good coaching staff or try and rebuild entirely from the ground up, then they could attract those type of players to actually take this franchise in a new direction. But arguably, they're just making the same mistakes over and over again with their new roster builds, rather than actually committing to some next up talent, which might actually work out. I think Jimbo was honestly pretty underrated, especially his LAN performances last season. But definitely to read your thoughts on all that in the comment section below. The drama was certainly going rogue. And just to mention some interesting stats here from Brian Stats, Las Vegas Legion will see Temp and TJ reunite. They actually have pretty good placings in in their career. 2015 UMG Cali, 5th through 6th. Season 2 playoffs, 3rd. And then Major 1 in Cold War, they came 6th there as well. So this duo definitely does go way back. Very much enjoyed your thoughts down below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.